Hello and welcome back to Time Under Tension. I am your host, Olivia Gravengard, registered nurse, health coach, and professional bodybuilder. And I work with people to optimize their health so they can maximize their impact in every area of life. This week, we're going to be talking about nutrition myths that hold you back. There is so much information in the world about nutrition. There are dozens, hundreds of experts out there talking about certain ways of eating, and they have science to back it up, and they have success stories to back it up. And they have a lot of really amazing things to say that can be extremely convincing. And not to say that these ways of eating, these styles of dieting are incorrect, because obviously there's a ton of evidence to back them up. But I think what can be confusing is that some of these diets, a lot of them have very different principles. And so, for those of us who really love to find peace in some kind of certainty, it can be really difficult to navigate all of these different styles of eating that we hear about on social media and Netflix documentaries that our friends are talking about, that YouTube influencers are promoting, and kind of sort through all the noise and say, well, if these things are contradictory, and one person saying that keto is the way to go, carnivore is the way to go, no, vegetarian and plant-based, or Mediterranean in the blue zones, like there's so many ways to eat that I find that we have like analysis by paralysis. And I don't work, I, at this point as a coach, during these last few years, I run into more people who it's not that they don't have any nutrition knowledge. Actually, I find that what's more confusing is they have so much information coming at them about nutrition that they feel a little bit paralyzed because they don't know how to sort through it and really identify which way to go with it. And then that coupled with the fact that truly changing your body and especially your mindset takes longer than most of us anticipate. And so we're willing to implement some new style of eating, but only for a short amount of time, usually an amount of time that doesn't allow for true change. And then we become a bit disenchanted. We get bored with the process. We get distracted by some other promise coming from maybe a different style of eating that we kind of jump ship and start something new and then kind of go through the adaptation process all over again until, again, we get distracted, we get bored, we get a little bit complacent, and we look for something new and shiny. And that's just how we are. Like, this isn't about shame. This isn't about like you're not disciplined enough. And I think that's where a lot of us go in our mind is like, I don't know why I'm trying all these things. They're just not working. And it can be extremely discouraging. But I would say, like, more often than not, you're going to sabotage yourself by switching things around too frequently. That said, I think that the most important thing is to learn how to listen to your body so you can figure out what works for you so that you're not just doing something over and over and again endlessly and not seeing any results, but instead you have the bodily awareness to recognize, like, okay, this works for me. And maybe this thing makes sense conceptually, but I can tell that it doesn't feel right in my body. And when you can develop that awareness, dude, you are in because you can listen to experts talk about tons of different ways of eating, again, that are very evidence based. And yet, your particular body, your particular lifestyle is going to dictate to some degree how you respond. And so you need to really learn how to listen to your body. So when I work with clients, I talk to them about, like, what do you like? Like, what do you enjoy eating? Do you have certain preferences? Are there things that you really don't like? Let's talk about your schedule. Let's kind of work out when in your day you can eat. When in your day are you the most active? Let's look at your lab work. How is your blood sugar management? What are we looking at genetically that might be impacting the way that you handle food? Do we have any hormonal issues that we need to be addressing with your diet? We could sit there and talk about the benefits of intermittent fasting all day, but if you're someone who has a very like high cortisol lifestyle and your sex hormones are in the tank, intermittent fasting probably is not going to be the best choice for you. So they say what to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And when we only have one approach, we kind of think we can throw that at everyone and everything. And it's just not a very wise way to look at things. And we wouldn't do that with a lot of other things in our life. I think an example of this is like education. Everyone learns a little bit differently. So as a student, ideally, although in your early years, you're very led by the system, as you get older and more mature in your learning process, you learn what works for you. So ideally by college, you have some skills developed in terms of your study habits and what works well for you in learning. I knew that rewriting things over and over really helped me learn. Well, a lot of people learn through like audio. So you have to like learn what works for you. And that's really what this journey is about, is like implement something that gives you kind of a blueprint so that you're not just doing things willy-nilly without any kind of guidance. And at the same time, learn more about your body, reflect frequently, start to notice, when I made this change, how did that affect my digestion? When I implemented this food, how were my energy levels? When I reduced my meal frequency, did that affect my recovery? So you start to ask yourself those questions, and then you have a very well-rounded way of reflecting on how certain strategies may or may not work for you. And then you build your personal toolbox with which you can move forward and fine-tune your diet over time. So there's lots of science-based approaches to nutrition, and really, I think that we tend to overcomplicate things. I'm sitting here saying everyone has a different response, but on the other hand, there are certain principles that we just have to go back to that are just true. And you can get into the weeds with each of these, which is where I think it can become a bit confusing. But if we really return to simple concepts and go back to basics, I think we can get a lot farther than that than we often like to acknowledge, because it can be really sexy to try something new and implement some kind of new strategy that's like cutting edge, and you only eat like steak all day long. And that's fine and dandy, but one, it's expensive. Two, it may not work for you, and you have to be realistic about that. And it also, I think, is important to say something may work for you for a certain amount of time, but not all of the time. It also may work for your spouse, but it doesn't work for you. And so we have to get out of this stage of like thinking that we're going to find one strategy that works for us forever for the rest of our life. I think learning principles, guiding principles, and learning how to hear what your body is telling you are the two things that you can really rest easy in, knowing that if you commit yourself to those, you'll be able to move forward with nutrition success. So basic principles, what are we really looking at here? A big one is caloric intake. You really want to make sure that if you have specific goals around body composition, you're establishing your true intake. I'm not about rigid tracking. I'm not a fan of that in terms of like a long-term approach. But if you don't have an awareness of what you're taking in, you're not going to be able to make very informed changes. Also, it's just good information. I think we have formulas that can give us an idea roughly of what you might be burning or might need to intake to maintain your weight. And that's great, but those are very rough formulas. And until you really get in there and start tracking, like, what do I eat on a daily basis that's kind of keeping me at this weight? Oh, that's helpful. I'm probably at my maintenance right now. It may be much higher or much lower than like the average. But the point is, you have to establish where you are at. You get an idea of your place so that you know where to go with it from there. If you don't think you're eating enough, like if you think you're in a caloric deficit, someone told me this the other day, and we hear this all the time on nutrition podcasts if you ever listen to them, but I was talking to someone who is trying to lose body fat, and she told me like, Well, they told me I have to be in a caloric deficit, but clearly that doesn't work because I don't eat enough and I can't lose any weight. And the fact is, like, if you're in a caloric deficit, you will lose body fat because your body has to pull it from somewhere. Like, that's just how it works. If you feel like your intake is really low and you're still not losing body fat, then it's likely there's some other things affecting how much you're expending. So naturally, we start to move a little bit less, but hormonal factors come into play. Our metabolism starts to slow down as we decrease intake for a prolonged amount of time. Stress is going to impact the way that we metabolize sugar. So there's lots of different things that are going to impact the way that we handle calories. The fact is, if you're in a deficit, you will lose weight gradually. If you're in a surplus, you will gain weight gradually. Like, that's just the math of it. And you have to get real about that, because I think sometimes we kind of confuse ourselves into thinking like, well, that's just not true because I'm not really eating enough. Maybe, but then there could be some other underlying issue that's kind of contributing to why you're not responding, which has nothing to do with whether or not you're eating based on some formula. Like, you might be like, based on some formula, you might be in a deficit, quote unquote, but you're not actually in a deficit because your body's not responding that way. So we need to figure out what's going on. So calories in, calories out, it's a real thing. There's lots of nuance, but like, you have to really grasp that and like accept that that's true. And then you can get into the details from there, but don't lose sight of that because that's really important. Another thing is like diversity. Like, we really want to optimize gut health. So we talk about macronutrients and we love protein, and protein's awesome. And you really want to make sure you're getting in enough protein. We kind of know that that's important. We know also that like, it's not as important where you're getting that from. You could be getting it from animal sources. You could be getting it from plant sources. As long as you're getting all of the amino acids and like a decent amount of leucine, you're good. That's great. Make sure if you are like vegan that you're really diligent about making sure you get complete proteins in a meal, because plant foods just often don't contain complete proteins, which is why animal foods are often like preferential in like a bodybuilding style diet where protein is king, because you're just getting whole protein sources, that complete protein sources that have all of the amino acids in them, which can be a little bit more difficult if you're following a very strict animal product free diet. So that's just something you have to take into consideration. So protein's important. Carbs are important for fueling. Do you have to have carbs? No, you don't. Like, we know now that you can go into ketosis where your body starts to adapt and shifts your energy system so that you can use fat for fuel. And in a crunch, your body can use protein for fuel. You have to decide if this is what's going to be best for you. Some people don't respond super well to a very high fat diet. And if all you eat is protein all the time, what becomes challenging with that is like, you're probably not getting the diversity of nutrients that you really need to optimize your health. So while you might be losing body fat over time, if you are like nutritionally deprived because your diet is very micronutrient poor, you're going to have issues as you move forward. So kind of learning to play the long game is what's important. Fats, do we need fat in our diet? Fat is really important for hormone function, being able to actually produce hormones. It's also important for brain function. So a lot of times we like to pull fats because they're a little bit higher calorie, which is fine for a short amount of time, but especially if you're female, rotating in some fatty options or some high quality fats throughout the month can be really helpful for keeping hormones in a healthy place. If you are like male and say taking TRT, it's not going to be like as important that you're getting a lot of fats, but you still want to get some because it's going to be important for like your brain health. So balance with that and making sure that you're using like anti-inflammatory options. So macros, we kind of like have an appreciation for macros. That became like a very strong like diet trend in the last like 10 years or so, where we track macros. We'd like to have macro goals, and then we can be flexible and kind of meet those goals however we want. What can get overlooked in that, from that perspective, is micronutrients. So micronutrients are taking things to the next step. It's like, okay, you have a gram of protein, but what's in that? And that's when we get to like the breakdown of amino acids, right? Or, a carbohydrate. It's like, okay, it's a carb, but like if we start to break it down, it's like we're looking at like the quality of the fibers in the carb. Like, are there phytonutrients? Do we have iron in this food source? So we start to get into more of like the vitamins and minerals and things that contribute a lot to underlying health processes that we may not like cognitively value as much when we're really focused on just losing body fat. But the problem with that is that if we are shortchanging ourselves and not giving ourselves all of the fuel that we need, in that all of those little micronutrients that are important to so many different body processes, we're going to run into issues. We're going to experience brain fog. We're going to start to compromise gut health. Maybe we pulled carbs out completely and now we're not getting any kind of fiber in our diet, no polyphenols, very few phytonutrients. We're strict on the carnivore diet. I see some digestive issues creep up with that over time. So I think based on like the largest amount of research and this really fascinating research on like the blue zones, which are like areas of the world in which people live the longest, um, it's really about balance. And that's just, again, it's just not the sexy answer that we like. We like to know, like, if I just eat steak all day, I could lose this much body fat, right? Which we see people do. They sit there and like eat it with their hands. And I get it. I've been there and done that. And I think it's also really valuable to try different styles of eating, again, in support of learning what works for your body and how you feel with different strategies. But that said, every time I come back to balance, I think it is the most important thing that we just don't really appreciate or value very much. But a lot of these cultures that are much healthier than the American culture are just a lot more balanced. They implement fats and carbs and, moderate animal source intake. And there's just more moderation across the board with everything. I think sometimes we kind of want to know, like, is there something I could have that I could have as much as I want of without having to restrict? And that feels a little bit safer for those of us who have grown up in diet culture where we've probably like undereaten and overeaten and undereaten, and where our brains get so hijacked by a lot of these like really palatable foods. It might feel easier to just go to something like carnivore where it's like very clear bumpers of like I can operate within this range, but like I'm scared because as soon as I have a Logan's Roadhouse roll, like all bets are off, right? And so we kind of like put blinders on and just say like, no, I can only eat these things. And that might help. And I think those can be helpful diets for like a clean out phase when you just want to really dial in. But coming back to balance often is where I see the most sustainable long-term progress and the highest like expression of health, where people's lab work comes back good. They're feeling mentally clear. They feel very comfortable with all kinds of foods, and they also might tend to lean towards certain types. But when everything is like, so to speak, on the table, you now get to ask yourself, okay, based on everything that I have available, what sounds good for my body now? And when you just start to clear out all the crap, all the artificial stuff, the sweeteners, the dyes, the really processed foods that just, of course, our body's going to naturally want more. When we just clear that noise out, we can get very clear about, oh, okay, I have options right now. I've got like steak, chicken, some tofu, some vegetables, brown rice, quinoa, sweet potato, some avocado, olive oil. Based on this spread, like what sounds good? And then you just kind of find this like range of foods that's fairly diverse, from which you can just use your blueprint that you build for yourself or have, work with a coach to develop. You use your blueprint to kind of apply the principles that work for you and say, okay, based on this spread, all of my options, how do I want to throw these together? And it's like, I don't know, sweet potatoes and fish sound really good today. Or like, I am not really wanting meat. Like, I just can't get myself to like taste, like I cooked it and now I don't even want it. Like, okay, that's great. Do you know, like, have you tried a tofu stir fry? Yeah, tofu stir fry with some stir fry veggies and a little bit of brown rice sounds great. Awesome. You have like this this wide palette and you can mix and match things, but you're still kind of adhering to those primary principles that we covered. So I think being able to develop a blueprint is one of the most effective ways of approaching your nutrition. We talk about diet culture. If you've heard of this before, it's like this idea that we're always on a diet. And the problem is like the research on dieting is really poor. It's most likely that if you're on a diet, you will not only gain all the weight back, but that you'll gain more than the weight that you had at the start. So when you make a change to your diet in order to reduce body fat specifically, you have to have a reverse plan, which is like, how am I going to get back to my maintenance and sustain this long term? You can't just diet forever. And the worst thing is to like diet, and then overeat and compensate and go through a period of stress where you just eat a ton of stuff and your body fat's now even higher than it was before. And now you get on another diet again. Like those swings are just so bad for us mentally and physically, that to really be honest with yourself about establishing balance is so incredibly important. I think another misconception is that this has a lot to do with willpower. And I think that within every misconception, there's something that's usually truthful, which is what makes them so devious at times. You have to be disciplined. Like you have to develop discipline. It's just like it's inevitable as an adult. Like if you want to have a full and successful life, if you want to live to your fullest capacity, like you have to develop some discipline. In like therapy or trauma work, you'll hear like reparenting, like you learn to develop this like healthy parental voice for yourself where you're like, I know what's best for me, and even if I don't always want it, I'm going to make this choice. And that's like how to develop that voice, is like, what would that voice say? Not the voice that's like, but I really want it and I deserve to have this. It's like, okay, that's a little childish, but we have that. Like it's not a judgment, it just is. And then there's the opposite end where we're like, no, you can't have that. We can't look at it at all. Like I'm not allowed, whatever. That's like opposite end, right? That's like our super ego. We need to find that middle ground that's more like, what's your wise mind? What's your like healthy evaluation of everything? It's like, okay, I'm feeling like I want this thing. I also feel kind of scared to have it. What's most important to me right now? And just to start to establish a relationship with that voice, it's incredibly important. But this isn't all just about willpower. I think that the times that most of us struggle with food is more about the fact that we've learned to use food to fill a void or to manage stress, or that we've associated food with relaxation. And so now we're having trouble untying the two, like untethering the two from each other. If you find yourself struggling with food, I think backing out, zooming out of the situation and saying, like, what all is going on right now in my life? Like, what is weighing on me? Maybe even where do I feel kind of unfulfilled or empty? Those can be really helpful questions for starting to sort through, like, why you're struggling with adherence. It's like, so often I find that people really struggle around the holidays with food and overeating. And yes, there's some habit there. There's kind of like tradition, even societally around certain holidays. But one of the biggest drivers of overeating around the holidays is family stress. And so when we get stressed, we kind of need like an outlet. And the thing about like eating is it can kind of have this like numbing effect, especially if the food is like providing a lot of dopamine for our bodies and we're very like dopamine deficient, or we feel dopamine deficient because we're used to getting so much dopamine from different things in our environment, that emotionally now we're being driven to eat. And so I think that can take some of the blame out of like needing to just will your way through it. Now, having those moments to pause and really ask yourself, like, is this aligned with what I want? That's important. That's discipline. But moving past willpower, we also need to start asking, like, when am I struggling the most with food? And is it maybe after I've like under eaten for a prolonged amount of time? Do I find myself on this like under eat binge cycle? That's something you have to be real about. You just need to really start ironing out your own patterns, which is what goes back to like learn about your body. Learn about your body. It's the most valuable thing you could ever do. It sets you up for success in every single area of your life. Like it's the vessel through which you experience the world. So if you can optimize your health, start to learn what your body's telling you, you gain access to this reservoir of wisdom that like changes the way you experience the rest of your life. It changes your relationships. It changes your relationship with yourself because you feel very present and you kind of accept your body and learn to work with it. There's no longer this like war of I want this, like I want to look this way or feel this way. And like my body is just like, it's never quite working right. Like there's always something wrong. Like it pulls us out of that mindset and starts to get us like turning back to our body and saying, okay, look, I want to work with you now. Like, what do you need? I really want to know what you need. And then you just start learning. And the more you learn, you'll start to also tap into this deeper, like gut wisdom where, like, you'll hear something and you'll be like, I think I need to do that. And it's different than that, like, oh, well, that sounds new and exciting. So I'm going to try that. It's more of like, it's really difficult to explain until you experience it. And I'm sure if you like really think about it, you probably have plenty of examples where you've kind of had a gut feeling about something you like knew you needed to do or something you knew you needed to stop doing. The more you kind of clear out the cobwebs and get past all the shame and distinction with your body and just like get very clear on how to interact with it and listen to its signals, you start to tap into that gut feeling a lot more. And that also translates to being able to make more informed decisions around what's going to be best in regards to your diet. At this point in my journey, I noticed that there are times when like I will know what I need. It'll be so sudden and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I need turkey right now." I remember one time I had been vegetarian for just a few months, and I was vegetarian for a really long time and I really like enjoy that way of eating, but I can tell that my body on average feels best when I have some animal products. So I had gone back to eating like a vegetarian diet after really craving it for a while. So kind of following that intuitive nudge. And one day I was like, I came home from the gym and I was like, I would do pretty much anything for turkey right now. And I went and got turkey because at that point I had let go of like the judgment of like, well, I have committed to this and I feel bad if I drift away from it. I was like, I don't know, gonna do it. And I went and got turkey and I really like, I felt like something switched on in my brain. It was like, whoa, there was a nutrient I was like missing that I needed specifically from turkey. And it's so cool because as you develop that trust and you lean into it, what happens is you start to regulate your appetite. You start to really recognize like your hunger, fullness signals. You can also just get more in tune with when you feel like emotionally dysregulated and not actually hungry. You'll find yourself choosing things because they feel good, they energize you, and they don't negatively impact digestion. Like you just get this clarity around how to approach all this that clears out all the noise. And then you can have more fun with the process as you continually learn yourself and maybe try new ways of eating. But the goal and the intention changes. You're now working with your body to inform you as the ultimate decision maker so that you can find what works best for you. The clients client messages that I get that like just every time I have the biggest smile, it just fills my entire heart, is when someone's like, "Oh my gosh, I just went through Thanksgiving and I not only didn't even overeat, but I actually realized I didn't really want it. And I just had like a few bites of this thing and then I was really excited to get back to my meals tomorrow and I just never thought that I would feel that." I never had that relationship. I've always been so stressed over the holiday. Like that just fills my heart because I'm like, we all have access to that freedom. We do. It takes time. It's a relationship. So you have to put in the work. You have to have patience and you have to know that you're going to make mistakes, but that all of that's just part of like learning this other person is what it feels like. Like maybe someone, your body that you've been like kind of at odds with for a while. You haven't been on good terms. And now you have to like come back and build trust. And there's some fear and timidity there. There's some unfamiliarity. There's kind of this language barrier as well, where maybe your body's been telling you something for a long time and all you've perceived is like, well, I just feel like I need to smoke. Like that's all I can feel. But really, it's your body saying, hey, I'm really anxious right now. And like, if we can address what's going on, you're going to have a lot clearer signals and not just always try to address the need with some kind of band aid that isn't really solving the problem. So, I would just encourage you, like, if this isn't something you've dug into, but you're interested in improving your health, learn how to listen to your body. And if you don't know where to start with that, like take time to work with a coach. It's an investment in the most important thing you could ever invest in, arguably more than your kids. You know, if you don't take care of your body, there's only so much you can do in this life. And so to really take the time to learn, like, what do I need? What do I need to be my best self? What works for me? What doesn't? How do I even know that? How do I hear what my body's telling me? Like, that's what a good coach can give you. And if you are interested, if you want to learn more about that, you can always just book a call with me, like have a free discovery call where we can kind of talk through what that looks like and give you some ideas for starters. And we can see if that would be beneficial for you to work together and really learn more about your body. But in the meantime, there's so much you can do to learn about your body. I think logging, daily tracking is so important. Just starting to get on top of those primary parameters that define health, which are going to be like sleep, digestion, your energy levels, your mood, your hormonal cycle, where you're at mentally, what you're feeling physically, your performance in the gym. Like start tracking those things because you're not, unless you're aware of what's going on, it's going to be really hard to know what you need to change. And so getting clarity is the most important thing, really tracking all that stuff. And then commit to something, commit to something for, I would say 3 weeks minimum, but I like 6 weeks. But if you can commit to something for 3 weeks minimum, I want you to be realistic with it. Like, don't do something super crazy. And then, like, 3 weeks in, you're like, I committed to 6 weeks, but like, I want to gnaw my foot off right now. Or like, I haven't pooped in 4 days. It's like, okay, address it before you get to that point. Use your brain, be wise, listen to your body. That's what we're talking about here. And I don't mean that in a critical way, use your brain, but it's like, really, like, don't ever, me or anyone else's, like, do not ever take someone's advice about nutrition or any other way to treat your body and then not listen to what your body's telling you along the way. If you go in and you have all these red flags pop up, address it. Trust yourself first. Like you gotta learn to build that trust. And that means knowing when something's not working and being willing to make the change. That said, being able to commit to something and that is working, and or at least like you're not having any issues with, I think would be good to say. Because a lot of times we judge if something is working based on whether or not our weight is dropping. But if you implement something and you're like, okay, I feel pretty good on this, like I feel like this is sustainable. Maybe I'm getting a little bored, or maybe I'm not seeing my weight shift, but like I'm not having any issues. Cool, stick with it. Can you stick with it for 6 weeks? And throughout that time, track. What are you noticing? What changes? What doesn't change? What feels good? What doesn't feel good? What do you actually enjoy? Like you start to kind of like certain foods or certain patterns, or maybe you do intermittent fasting and this fasting window feels really good and you have a lot more mental clarity in the mornings. Like, what do you notice? Because this is your training ground. This is where you're going to learn about your body, but you have to like allow the experiment to run for as long as it needs to for you to really gather the data that you need. Unless you really commit to a certain amount of time, like you're not going to know what changes elicit what responses. So being consistent is so important. And the other layer to being consistent is there's something to developing your character through holding and honoring your commitments to yourself. there is nothing that really builds confidence more than being the kind of person who holds their commitments to themselves. Like, it's so important. So if this journey, yeah, maybe you want to achieve a certain body goal or like reduce your cholesterol or whatever, be able to run around with your kids, like you have some bigger goal, but like there's a layer in that of like, you want to feel better about yourself. Like, you don't want to gloat, but you want to feel more confident. Like you just want to feel good in your skin where you don't have to like worry about it and feel uncomfortable in your body and live in a state of comparison. You just want to feel good. Start making and keeping commitments to yourself. And I think that diet and exercise presents fantastic opportunities to practice keeping your commitments to yourself and developing confidence through that route as well, even as you make the changes that lead you into a healthier state that then amplifies your confidence. So lots of nutrition myths out there, and really just returning to the basics is so incredibly important. Where are you making it more complicated than it needs to be? I have no doubt in my mind that you have at least one idea of something that you need to do to live a healthier lifestyle that you know and you keep putting off or you keep avoiding or you keep gaslighting yourself into ignoring. Like there's something you know you need to do. What if you acted on it? What if you committed to it? And what if you upheld that commitment? Imagine how you would feel in 6 weeks. Imagine how you would feel when you tie your success to that. You experience so much more joy in your fitness journey than when you tie your fulfillment to a certain weight. If you can say, every time I show up and do the thing that I said I was going to do, I feel this boost. I feel another layer of confidence. Like, you can maintain momentum so much more effectively than if you put it on some external measure, like whether or not my weight goes down this week. So just another tip for your journey. But thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. You can like and subscribe. This is on Apple. This is on Spotify. You can also watch this on YouTube. And comment below. I'd love to hear your feedback. What are some nutrition myths that you've believed in the past? I've definitely personally gone through like believing carbs were the devil and then opposite, believing fat was, and lots of different diets around like celery juice and cabbage and boiled eggs. And so curious what nutrition myths maybe you've held on to in the past or have thought were absolutely ridiculous, or maybe even some myths that you're operating out of now that you're not really sure if they're right, but they kind of feel good. So curious what strategies you followed and what's worked. What do you notice? Like, what are the things that consistently work for you? And if you have something that you're wanting to commit to for the next 6 weeks, comment it below, like putting it out there in the world and really writing it down and saying, okay, I'm telling myself and others, I'm going to do this thing. There's something to that level of accountability where it makes it, there's a little bit more like positive pressure to keep your word because there's more on the line than just disappointing yourself. When we learn to tie the two together, we can start to put more value in what it means to disappoint ourselves and what it means to actually make ourselves proud, which is, again, just one of the greatest ways to sustain momentum as you move forward. So remember, like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching and or listening, and I will catch you next time on Time Under Tension.